The napkin cost less than a penny, but the chemical formula scrawled on the back of it was worth $4 billion. He didn't look at her face. He didn't notice the calluses on her hands were from pipettes, not just scrubbing plates. He only saw a uniform. When Bradford Halloway snapped his fingers and told the woman to shut up and bring the menu, he thought he was asserting dominance over a servant. He didn't realize he was handing his career, his reputation, and his life over to the only person on earth capable of saving them. This is the story of how arrogance met genius, and why you should never, ever judge someone by their apron. The sound of snapping fingers is distinct. It cuts through the ambient hum of polite conversation, the clinking of crystal stemware, and the low, jazzy bass line playing over the speakers of L'Obsidian, Chicago's most pretentious steakhouse. It is a sound that demands attention, but rarely earns respect. Evelyn Moore froze. She was balancing a heavy tray containing 3 lobster bisques and a bottle of sparkling water, navigating the tight space between table 4 and the heavy velvet curtains of the VIP section. The snap came again, louder, wetter, more aggressive. Snap, snap. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had trained herself out of flinching 3 years ago. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the tray, delivered the soups to the elderly couple at table 4 with a soft, practiced smile, and then turned slowly toward table 9. Table 9 was the power table. It was situated in the center of the room, bathed in the golden glow of a low-hanging chandelier, designed to make the occupants look like gods among men. Tonight, the god in question was Bradford Halloway. Bradford was a man who wore his insecurity like a suit of armor. He was dressed in a charcoal 3-piece that cost more than Evelyn's car, and his wrist bore a watch heavy enough to anchor a small boat. He was currently red-faced, sweating slightly despite the aggressive air conditioning, and glaring at the empty space where a waiter should have been 3 minutes ago. Evelyn approached the table. She kept her hands clasped behind her back, her posture perfect. "Good evening, sir. My name is—" "I don't care about your name," Bradford barked. He didn't look up. He was busy furiously typing on a sleek black phone, his thumbs moving with manic energy. "I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. The water glass is empty. The bread basket is stale. And I have guests, very important guests, arriving in 15 minutes. He finally looked up, his eyes scanning her uniform with a look of pure disdain. He saw the black apron, the white button-down shirt that was slightly too large, and the sensible non-slip shoes. He categorized her instantly. Help, unskilled, invisible. "Just bring the menu," he snapped. "And try not to look so confused. It's a piece of paper with food on it. Do you need me to draw you a map to the kitchen?" The restaurant went quiet in their immediate radius. A woman at table 7 lowered her fork. A busboy froze near the water station. Evelyn stared at him. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality, but behind her eyes that were a piercing, intelligent gray, a supercomputer was whirring to life. She analyzed Bradford Halloway not as a rude customer, but as a specimen. Subject exhibits signs of extreme cortisol elevation, she thought, noting the vein pulsing in his temple. Dilated pupils suggest a fight-or-flight response, likely induced by career-threatening stress. He's not angry at me. He's terrified of who is coming to dinner. "The wine list as well, sir?" Evelyn asked, her voice an even, melodic contralto. It was a voice that had once commanded lecture halls in Zurich and Boston. Bradford slammed his hand on the table. "Did I ask for the wine list? I asked for the menu. God, is it impossible to get competent service in this city? I'm hosting Arthur Pendleton tonight. Do you know who that is? No, of course you don't. You probably think he's a football player. Just go. Move." He made a shooing motion with his hand, like swatting a fly. Evelyn took a single, slow breath. In a previous life, she would have eviscerated him. She would have pointed out that his tie knot was asymmetrical, implying a rushed dressing routine. She would have noted that his expensive watch was a high-end replica, the bezel slightly off-center. She would have told him that Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a CEO, but a man with a severe gluten allergy and a hatred for Syrah. Details Bradford clearly didn't know if he was panicking this much. But Evelyn Moore wasn't Dr. Moore anymore. Not on paper. Not here. "Right away, sir," she said softly. She turned on her heel and walked toward the kitchen. As she pushed through the double swing doors, the cacophony of the kitchen hit her, the sizzle of steaks, the shouting of the expediter, the clatter of plates. "Rough table?" asked Jeremy, a 20-year-old culinary student plating salads. "Table 9, Evelyn said, grabbing 3 heavy leather-bound menus. "Holloway, VP of Operations for Kimball Fine Pharmaceuticals." Jeremy whistled. "Big pharma. Big tipper?" "Unlikely," Evelyn murmured. "He's desperate. He's waiting for Arthur Pendleton." Jeremy looked at her, confused. "Who?" "The CEO of the holding company that owns Kimball Fine," Evelyn said, checking the cleanliness of the menus. "If Holloway is meeting Pendleton on a Friday night, it's not for a promotion. It's a crisis meeting. Holloway is about to lose his job, and he's looking for a scapegoat." Jeremy blinked. "How do you know all that?" Evelyn paused. She looked at the grease stain on the wall, then down at her apron. "I read the Financial Times, Jeremy. Just bring me the bread basket. Fresh. Warm. If it's cold, he'll have an aneurysm." She walked back out onto the floor, the heavy menus tucked under her arm. She was entering the lion's den. But the lion didn't know he was trapped in the cage with the zookeeper. To understand why a woman with an IQ of 165 was serving sourdough bread to a mid-level pharmaceutical executive, you have to understand the nature of silence. 5 years ago, Evelyn Moore had been a ghost. That was what they called the researchers in the deep, the subterranean levels of the Voorhees Institute in Seattle. They were the ones who didn't publish papers. They didn't go to conferences. They didn't exist. They worked on government contracts and high-risk virology. Evelyn had been the lead biochemist on Project Ether. It was supposed to be a neuroregenerative compound, a miracle drug designed to reverse the effects of early-onset Alzheimer's. It was the holy grail of modern medicine. She had cracked the code. She had found the protein sequence. But she had also found the side effect. In 4% of the trials during the simulation phase, not even animal testing yet, just high-level predictive modeling, the compound didn't just regenerate neurons, it overcharged them. It caused a cascade failure. The brain would essentially short-circuit. It was a death sentence, painful and immediate. Evelyn had flagged the data. She had gone to her superior, Dr. Aris Thorne. "It's a statistical anomaly, Evelyn," Thorne had said, swirling his scotch in his office that overlooked the rainy skyline. "We can iron it out in human trials." "You can't iron out a cytokine storm in a human brain, Aris," she had argued. "If we move to production, people will die. The variance is in the synthetic binding agent. It's unstable." They didn't listen. There were billions of dollars in venture capital on the line. The board wanted a product launch, not a safety delay. When Evelyn threatened to go to the FDA before the trial began, the machinery of the corporate world turned against her. It happened overnight. Her credentials were questioned. A fabricated plagiarism scandal from her undergraduate years, totally baseless but impossible to disprove quickly, was leaked to the academic press. Her security clearance was revoked. She was escorted out of the building by armed guards, her research seized, her hard drives wiped. Then came the lawsuit. a non-disclosure agreement so tight it practically forbade her from speaking English. They sued her for corporate espionage as a warning shot. They drained her bank account with legal fees. They blacklisted her from every reputable lab in North America and Europe. Dr. Evelyn Moore, the prodigy who had completed her PhD at 24, was professionally dead at 29. So she ran. She left Seattle. She moved to Chicago, rented a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and old curry, and took a job where no one asked for a CV. She became Evelyn the Waitress. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she was biding her time, gathering evidence, waiting for the non-compete to expire. But it had been 3 years. The silence had become comfortable. Until tonight. Back at table 9, Bradford Halloway was vibrating with nervous energy. He had already downed 2 glasses of the house water and was currently shredding a coaster. Evelyn placed the menus down gently. "The wine list, sir." He snatched it from her. "About time. When Mr. Pendleton arrives, you are not to speak. You pour the water, you take the order, and you vanish. Do you understand? This is a sensitive conversation." "Understood," Evelyn said. "And for God's sake," Bradford muttered, scanning the list. "Do you have anything decent? A Cabernet that doesn't taste like vinegar?" "The 2018 Camus is drinking very well right now," Evelyn said, unable to help herself. "Though if Mr. Pendleton prefers something with less tannin structure due to his sensitivities, perhaps the Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley Reserve would be safer." Bradford looked at her, his eyes narrowing. For a second, the fog of his narcissism cleared. "What do you know about tannin structure?" "I read the back of the bottle, sir," Evelyn lied smoothly. Bradford scoffed, his superiority reasserting itself. "Right. The back of the bottle. Stick to carrying plates, honey. I'll order the Bordeaux. The most expensive one you have. Appearances matter." "Very good." As Evelyn walked away, the front door of the restaurant opened. The air pressure in the room seemed to shift. The host stand straightened up. The manager, a nervous little man named Gregory, rushed forward. Walking through the door was Arthur Pendleton. He was a small man, unassuming in stature, but he moved with the gravitational pull of a planet. He was followed by 2 younger associates who looked like hungry sharks in suits. But it was the man walking beside Arthur who made Evelyn's blood run cold. He was tall, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was laughing at something Arthur said, clapping the CEO on the back. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, her old boss, the man who ruined her life. Evelyn ducked behind the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What is he doing here? She peeked around the espresso machine. They were heading to table 9. Bradford Halloway jumped up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair, practically bowing as he shook Arthur's hand, then Aris's. Evelyn's mind raced. Kimball Fine Pharmaceuticals, Voorhees Institute. If Bradford Halloway was meeting the CEO of Kimball Fine, and Aris Thorne was there, that meant Kimball Fine was buying the Voorhees research. They were buying Project Ether. They were buying the poison she had tried to stop. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She clenched them into fists. She could walk out the back door right now. She could quit. She could go back to her studio apartment and let the world burn. It wasn't her problem anymore. "Evelyn!" Gregory, the manager, hissed, appearing at her elbow. "Table 9. They're seated. Why are you hiding? Go take the drink order. Mr. Pendleton likes sparkling water with lime." I can't," Evelyn whispered. "What do you mean you can't?" Gregory's face went red. "That is a $4,000 table. If you don't get out there in 10 seconds, don't bother coming back tomorrow." Evelyn looked at Gregory. She looked at table 9, where Aris Thorne was settling into his seat, looking smug and victorious. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. It was the same anger that had fueled her through 3 years of poverty. "Fine," Evelyn said, smoothing her apron. "I'll take the order." She grabbed her notepad. She wasn't just a waitress tonight. She was a spy, and she was going to hear every single word they said. Evelyn approached table 9 with the practiced invisibility of a spy. In her hands, she carried the heavy crystal decanter of the Bordeaux Bradford had ordered, a 2009 Chateau Margaux, costing more than her rent for the next 6 months. The conversation at the table was already underway, a low hum of corporate posturing. "The Phase 2 results are unprecedented, Arthur," Aris Thorne was saying, his voice smooth and cultured, like expensive velvet. "We're not just talking about halting dementia. We're talking about reversal, cognitive restoration. It's the closest thing to immortality we've ever bottled." Bradford Halloway chimed in, eager to claim credit. "And the acquisition timeline Kimball Fine has proposed is aggressive. We want to announce the merger by Monday morning. The market is starving for this." Evelyn stepped into the light. She uncorked the wine with fluid, silent movements. She could feel Aris Thorne's eyes on her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Don't look at him. Look at the glass. Look at the tablecloth." She poured a taste for Bradford. He swirled it, barely looking at it, and waved a dismissive hand. "Pour. Quickly. We're in the middle of something." As she moved around the table to pour for Arthur Pendleton, she risked a glance at the documents spread out on the white tablecloth. They were confidentiality agreements and high-level summaries of the Voorhees Institute's assets. And there, in bold font at the top of a glossy sheet, was the new name for Project Ether. Neuro-V. "I have to admit," Arthur Pendleton said, covering his glass with his hand to decline the wine, confirming Evelyn's suspicion about his sensitivities. "The data is impressive. Almost too impressive, Aris. You're showing a 98% efficacy rate with 0 significant adverse events in the primate trials. That's statistically improbable." Evelyn froze for a microsecond. "He knows," she thought. "Pendleton is smart. He smells the rot." Aris Thorne laughed, a sound that chilled Evelyn to the bone. "Arthur, you're thinking like a skeptic from the 90s. We're using a new synthetic binding agent. The volatility issues you might be worried about? We solved them 6 months ago. The compound is stable." "Stable," Evelyn whispered under her breath. It was a reflex. Bradford snapped his head up. "What did you say?" The table went silent. Aris Thorne turned his gaze toward her. His eyes, cold and blue, drilled into her face. Evelyn kept her chin down, her hair partially obscuring her profile. "I asked if the gentleman would like lemon or lime with his sparkling water," Evelyn lied, her voice dropping an octave, making it huskier, rougher. Bradford rolled his eyes. "Lime! I already told you. God, are you deaf?" Aris continued to stare at her. He tilted his head slightly. "Have we met?" The world stopped. The restaurant noise faded into a dull roar. Evelyn gripped the neck of the wine bottle so hard her knuckles turned white. If he recognized her, it was over. He would call the police. He would sue her for violating the restraining order he'd slapped on her 3 years ago. "I don't believe so, sir," Evelyn said, keeping her accent flat. Midwestern, stripping away the academic elocution she had spent her life perfecting. "I've worked here for 3 years." Aris studied her for one more agonizing second, then shrugged. He turned back to Arthur. "Apologies. She reminds me of a lab assistant I fired years ago. Similar incompetence." Bradford let out a sycophantic laugh. "Good help is hard to find, right, Aris?" "Indeed. Aris said, dismissing Evelyn entirely. He tapped the document on the table. Regarding the stability, Arthur, we replaced the carbon chain linker with a silicon-based stabilizer. It handles the thermal load perfectly. The brain doesn't overheat, the neurons just bloom. Evelyn finished pouring the water and stepped back into the shadows. Her blood was boiling. Silicon-based stabilizer. Her mind raced, visualizing the molecular geometry. That's impossible. If you swap carbon for silicon in that specific neurotransmitter sequence, you increase the molecular weight by 14%. It won't cross the blood-brain barrier effectively unless you raise the arterial pressure. It doesn't solve the overheating. It masks it until the pressure builds up and causes a stroke. He wasn't just lying. He was improvising. He was using junk science to close a $4 billion deal before the flaws could be discovered in an independent audit. She watched them. Bradford was practically salivating, thinking of his bonus. Aris was smug, thinking he had gotten away with murder. And Arthur Pendleton. Arthur looked unconvinced. He was rubbing his temple, looking at the charts. I'd like to see the raw spectral analysis of the binding agent, Aris, before we sign. Of course, Aris said, though his smile tightened. I don't have the raw data on me, obviously. It's on the secure servers in Seattle. But I assure you, it's pristine. If we wait for the data dump, we miss the Monday market opening. The stock dip Kimball Fine is experiencing. This fixes it instantly. Arthur hesitated. The pressure was working. He picked up his pen. Evelyn stood by the service station, 10 feet away. She couldn't let him sign. If he signed, production would start. Thousands of people would take NeuroV, and within 6 months, thousands of people would be dead from massive cerebral hemorrhages. She had to stop it, but she was just a waitress. If she spoke up, Bradford would have her thrown out before she finished a sentence. She needed a weapon. She looked down at her tray. She had a cocktail napkin, a standard white paper napkin. She pulled a cheap ballpoint pen from her apron pocket. Her hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of the scientific method. Prove it, she told herself. Don't argue. Prove. The dinner service was entering the chaos of the prime rush. But for Evelyn, the only thing that existed was the equation forming in her mind. She needed to show Arthur Pendleton why the silicon stabilizer was a lie. She needed to show him the math. She pressed the pen to the napkin. The ink bled slightly into the soft paper, but she moved with precision. She didn't write words. She wrote the reaction mechanism. 18 H24 N2O3 plus S. I dash linker yields at 37 degrees Celsius delta, H greater than 0. She sketched the molecular structure of the protein Aris was claiming to use. Then she drew the electron transfer arrow, showing where the bond would shear under human body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. At the bottom, she wrote 2 variables. Viscosity equals 4.2 centipoise. Blood. Result equals cascading failure. It was a complex biochemical proof condensed into 3 inches of paper. To a layman, it looked like chicken scratch. To a biochemist, or a CEO who had started his career as a pharmacist, like Arthur Pendleton, it was a smoking gun. Table 9 needs more bread, Gregory barked as he walked past her. Stop daydreaming, Evelyn. On it, Evelyn said. She placed the napkin on the bread plate, tucked underneath a fresh slice of sourdough, but with the writing facing up. It was a risk, a massive one. She walked back to the table. The mood was tense. Arthur was holding the pen, hovering over the signature line of the letter of intent. I have a bad feeling, Aris, Arthur was saying softly. My team hasn't vetted the silicon variants. Your team is slow, Arthur, Bradford interjected, his tone bordering on disrespectful. He was terrified the deal was slipping away. Iris is the leading mind in this field. If he says it works, it works. Don't let cold feet cost us billions. Iris leaned forward, his voice dropping to a predatory whisper. Trust is the currency of business, Arthur. Do you trust me? Evelyn arrived. Fresh bread for the table, she said. She placed the basket down. Then she reached out and took Arthur's empty bread plate to exchange it. As she did, she accidentally let the fresh napkin slide off her tray and land directly in front of him, right on top of the legal contract. Bradford slammed his hand on the table. For God's sake, you clumsy cow, watch what you're doing. Evelyn flinched, acting the part. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get it. Leave it, Bradford shouted. He looked at Arthur. Arthur, I apologize. This place is usually... But Arthur wasn't looking at Bradford. He wasn't looking at the bread. He was looking at the napkin. He froze. His hand, holding his expensive fountain pen, hovered in midair. He squinted at the blue ink scrawled on the cheap paper. Delta H greater than 0, Arthur Pendleton had not been a practicing scientist for 20 years, but he had a PhD in organic chemistry from MIT. He knew what an exothermic reaction looked like. He knew what happened when you introduced a silicon bond to a nitrogen-heavy environment under heat. He picked up the napkin. His fingers trembled slightly. What is this? Arthur whispered. Iris Thorne frowned. What is what? It's trash, Arthur. Let the girl take it. No, Arthur said, his voice sharpening. He looked up, scanning the room. Then his eyes landed on Evelyn. She was standing there, clutching her tray, her face blank, but her eyes locked on his. Did you write this? Arthur asked her. Bradford let out a strangled noise. Her? Arthur, she's a waitress. She barely knows how to open a wine bottle. She probably found it on the floor. I wrote it, Evelyn said clearly. Her voice wasn't the waitress's voice anymore. It was Dr. Moore's voice, authoritative, calm, absolute. Bradford stood up, his face purple. You are fired. Get out right now. Gregory. Sit down, Bradford, Arthur said. The command was so quiet, yet so violent, that Bradford sat down instantly. Arthur held up the napkin toward Iris Thorne. Iris, look at this. Iris glanced at the napkin with a sneer. It's nonsense. Graffiti. Is it? Arthur turned the napkin so Iris could see the electron transfer diagram. Because this calculation suggests that your silicon stabilizer creates a hyper-exothermic reaction at 37 degrees Celsius. It suggests that if I put this drug in a human body, it doesn't regenerate neurons. It cooks them. Iris's face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast it looked like a magic trick. He recognized the handwriting. He recognized the specific notation style, the way the Z in the enzyme variable was crossed. He looked up at Evelyn, really looked at her. He saw past the apron. He saw past the messy bun. He saw the woman he had destroyed. Evelyn, he breathed. Bradford looked between them, confused. You know her. Dr. Evelyn Moore, Arthur Pendleton said, reading the name of the scientist he had read about in the smear campaigns years ago. He looked at Evelyn with a mixture of shock and awe. The one who faked her data? I never faked my data, Evelyn said, stepping closer to the table. She felt 10 feet tall. I refused to fake it. That's why Ares fired me. That's why he sued me. Because I told him that Project Ether was lethal. And 3 years later, he's still trying to sell it to you, knowing full well it kills 4% of its subjects. The restaurant had gone silent again. This time it wasn't because of a rude customer. It was the silence of a bomb about to go off. "She's lying." Aris stood up, knocking his chair over. "She's a disgruntled employee, a thief. She's working as a waitress because she's insane." "I'm working as a waitress because you blacklisted me from every lab in the country," Evelyn shot back, her voice ringing out. "But I didn't forget the chemistry, Aris, and neither did you. That's why you haven't published the binding agent data, because it doesn't exist." She turned to Arthur. "Ask him for the thermal variance logs from last month's simulation. Ask him why he's using a silicon proxy in the paperwork. It's because the carbon bonds shattered in the heat." Arthur Pendleton looked at Aris. The COO's eyes were hard as diamonds. "Well, Aris?" Arthur asked. "Is she right? Can I see the logs?" Aris opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the door. He looked at Bradford. Bradford Halloway, realizing his promotion was dissolving into thin air, decided to double down on his stupidity. He stood up and pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn. "You listen to me, you little bitch," Bradford spat. "I don't care what you wrote on that napkin. You are ruining a billion-dollar evening. I will have you arrested. I will—" "Shut up, you idiot," Aris hissed at him. But it was too late. Arthur Pendleton slowly folded the napkin and placed it in his breast pocket. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "The deal is off," Arthur said. "Arthur, wait," Aris pleaded, reaching out. "She's a fraud. You can't listen to a waitress over a Nobel nominee." "I'm not listening to a waitress," Arthur said, looking at Evelyn with a newfound respect. "I'm listening to the person who just saved me $4 billion and a federal indictment." He turned to his associates. "Pack up. We're leaving." Then Arthur turned to Evelyn. "Dr. Moore, I think my car is outside. Would you care to join me? I'd like to hear more about this thermal variance. And I believe you're owed a better dinner than whatever they're feeding you in the kitchen." Evelyn looked at Bradford. He was slumped in his, to the floor. "I'd love to," she said, but she let it drop to the floor. "I'd love to," she said. But the drama wasn't over. As Evelyn moved to follow Arthur, Aris Thorne lunged. Desperation makes men do foolish things, and Aris was a desperate man. "You can't take that napkin!" Aris shouted, grabbing for Arthur's arm. "That's proprietary Voorhees property." It was a physical assault on a billionaire CEO in a crowded restaurant. The security detail Arthur traveled with, 2 men who had been sitting at a nearby table, blending in, were on him in a second. One of them twisted Aris's arm behind his back, slamming him face first into the white tablecloth of table 9, right into the lobster bisque. Bradford shrieked. Evelyn watched Aris struggle, his face smeared with creamy soup, his dignity shattered. "Actually," Evelyn said, looking down at him, "the napkin belongs to the restaurant, but the formula, that belongs to the truth." She turned and walked out of the dining room, stepping over her apron, leaving the silence of Lobsidian behind her. The back seat of Arthur Pendleton's Maybach was quieter than a tomb. The city of Chicago blurred past the tinted windows, streaks of neon and rain. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and impending war. Evelyn sat on the edge of the seat, her hand still smelling faintly of restaurant sanitizer. She felt like an imposter again. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by the cold reality of what she had just done. She had humiliated a powerful man. Men like Aris Thorne didn't get mad, they got even. "You're shaking," Arthur said. He opened a small refrigerator compartment and handed her a bottle of water. "Drink." "I'm not thirsty," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Pendleton, you need to understand. Aris won't stop. He has the Voorhees legal team. They buried me once. They'll do it again. I just violated a non-disclosure agreement by writing that formula on the napkin. They can put me in prison." Arthur looked at her. In the passing street lights, he looked older, tired. "Dr. Moore, do you know why I was so desperate to close this deal tonight?" Evelyn shook her head. "My wife, Margaret," Arthur said softly. "She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 3 years ago. She's 55. She doesn't recognize me anymore. Some days she screams when I walk into the room because she thinks I'm an intruder." Evelyn's breath hitched. She saw the pain etched into the billionaire's face. It wasn't about stock prices. It was about love. "I have unlimited resources," Arthur continued. "I can buy countries. But I can't buy her memory back. Aris Thorne promised me he could. He dangled hope in front of a drowning man." Arthur's voice hardened. "But if what you say is true, if he was going to inject her with a compound that would boil her brain, then he is not a businessman. He is a monster." "It's true," Evelyn said, looking him in the eye. "The silicon stabilizer is a shortcut. It's cheaper to synthesize than the organic carbon linker I designed, but it can't handle the synaptic firing rate. It's like putting a lawnmower engine in a fighter jet. It tears itself apart." Arthur nodded. He pulled out his phone. "Then we are going to war." He dialed a number. "Get me the legal team at Baker McKenzie. Yes, the senior partners. Wake them up. I want a forensic audit of the Voorhees Institute, started by 8 a.m. tomorrow. And get me security for a Dr. Evelyn Moore. She's the new asset." The car slowed down, pulling up to the curb of the Peninsula Hotel. But as the driver moved to open the door, a black SUV swerved in front of them, cutting them off. Evelyn gasped. 2 men in suits jumped out of the SUV. They weren't police. They were corporate fixers. One of them held a manila envelope. The driver of Arthur's car locked the doors instantly. Arthur rolled down the window just an inch. "Can I help you?" The man outside didn't smile. He shoved the envelope against the glass. "Service of process, Mr. Pendleton, and for Dr. Moore. Temporary restraining order, and an injunction for theft of trade secrets. If Dr. Moore enters any Kimball Fine facility or speaks to the press, she will be in violation of federal law." Aris had moved fast. He had a judge on speed dial. Arthur took the envelope through the crack. He glanced at it, then looked at Evelyn. "They're trying to silence you before the sun comes up." Evelyn felt the walls closing in. "I told you, I can't fight them. I have no money, no lawyer." Arthur smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that reminded Evelyn why he was the CEO of a global conglomerate. "You don't need money, Evelyn," Arthur said. "You have the truth. And tonight, you have me. Let's see if Aris Thorne's lawyers can outrun my checkbook." Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of wet slate, hanging heavy over the Chicago skyline. The Kimball Fine headquarters was a glass monolith, a fortress of steel and ego that seemed to vibrate with the tension of the impending merger. Inside the executive boardroom on the 40th floor, the atmosphere was suffocatingly formal. The room was a masterclass in corporate coldness, a 40-foot mahogany table, leather chairs that smelled of wealth, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city below look like a collection of toys. Aris Thorne sat at the head of the table, his posture a study in calculated confidence. He had spent the weekend scrubbing the internet of any mention of a Waitress incident, and he looked refreshed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him, Bradford Halloway was a stark contrast. Bradford looked like a man who had been put through a centrifugal force. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie was slightly askew, and he was twitching, checking his phone every 30 seconds, as if expecting a bomb threat. Across from them sat a phalanx of 10 lawyers from the Voorhees Institute, armed with leather-bound folders and the smug expressions of men who had never lost a fight. This is a waste of time, Aris said, checking his Patek Philippe with a theatrical sigh. Arthur is 40 minutes late. It's a classic power play, but it's beneath him. He can't back out of the letter of intent without a penalty fee of $50 million. And as for the waitress, if she shows her face within a block of this building, the marshals I've stationed in the lobby will have her in cuffs before she can say, "Labor laws." Bradford wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip with a trembling hand. Aris, are you sure? The napkin. I keep thinking about the math. It looked real. The notation was so specific. Shut up, Bradford, Aris snapped, his voice dropping to a low, predatory hiss. It's a scare tactic. She's a disgruntled former lab tech with a grudge and a flair for the dramatic. We control the narrative. We control the data. Now sit up and look like a vice president instead of a terrified child. The heavy double doors at the far end of the room didn't just open, they were thrown wide. Arthur Pendleton walked in first. He wasn't the tired, grieving man Evelyn had seen in the car. He was a titan. He moved with a predatory grace, flanked by a legal team that made the Voorhees group look like public defenders. But it was the woman walking beside him who stopped the hearts of everyone in the room. Evelyn Moore had shed the black apron and the sensible shoes. She wore a tailored navy suit that fit her like armor. Her hair, usually tucked into a messy bun, was sleek and professional. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like the smartest person in the room. Because she was. Aris stood up so quickly, his chair screeched against the marble floor. This is a violation of the injunction. Security. I want this woman removed immediately. She is a trespasser and a thief. Sit down, Aris, Arthur said. The tone was quiet, but it carried the weight of a gavel. Arthur didn't go to his seat. He walked to the center of the table and threw a thick, blue-bound file onto the mahogany. The sound echoed like a gunshot. What is this? Aris sneered, though his eyes were darting toward the exits. More fan fiction from your server? That, Evelyn spoke up, her voice clear and resonant, filling every corner of the vast room, is the independent spectral analysis of the Batch 404 compound. We didn't need to enter your lab to get it, Aris. We simply bought a sample of the precursor chemicals from the grey market supplier you've been using in Singapore to cut costs. You were sloppy. You assumed no one would check the purity of the raw silicon-based binder. Aris froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it the color of parchment. You have no right to that data. That's proprietary. It's evidence, Evelyn interrupted. She walked toward the large electronic whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a digital stylus. The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. She began to write. She didn't just draw the formula from the napkin, she tore the entire Voorhees research apart. She mapped the molecular failure points, showing exactly where the silicon bond would shear under the thermal load of a human brain's synaptic firing. C18, H24, N2O3 plus silicon linker yields exothermic cascade. She turned to face the board of directors, her grey eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire. Aris Thorne switched to a silicon-based stabilizer because the organic peptide I originally designed takes 6 weeks to cultivate in a controlled environment. He didn't have 6 weeks. He wanted to launch this quarter to inflate the stock price before the acquisition. He chose speed over safety. He chose a quarterly bonus over the lives of every patient who would have taken this drug. She stepped toward the table, pointing to the file. Page 14. The toxicity report from the Singapore batch. The silicon doesn't stay in the blood-brain barrier. It binds to the myelin sheath of the nerves. It doesn't fix the brain. It strips the insulation off the wiring. It isn't a cure. It's a chemical lobotomy. Bradford Halloway grabbed the file, his hands shaking so violently the pages rattled. He flipped to the designated page, his eyes scanning the red-lined data. Oris. You told me the side effects were negligible. You said it was just nausea and mild headaches. You said the primate trials were perfect. The primate trials were faked, Bradford, Evelyn said, her voice rising for the first time. He suppressed the necropsy reports of the test subjects that suffered hemorrhages. She's lying, Aris screamed, slamming his fists on the table. She's a fraud. She's a failed academic who washes dishes for a living. Are you really going to take the word of a waitress over a Nobel nominee? Actually, Arthur Pendleton said, standing up and buttoning his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. I'm taking the word of the new chief scientific officer of Kimball Fine. The room erupted in a chorus of hushed gasps. Aris looked like he had been struck. As of 6 a.m. this morning, Arthur continued, I have acquired the controlling interest in the Voorhees Institute. I didn't just back out of the merger, Aris. I bought your debt. I bought your lease. I own the lab. I own the patents, and quite frankly, I own the chair you're sitting in. Arthur turned to the two uniformed security guards who had been standing by the door, men who worked for Kimball Fine, not Aris. Please escort Mr. Thorne off the premises. He is no longer authorized to be in this building. Aris opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He looked at the lawyers, but they were already closing their briefcases, distancing themselves from a sinking ship. He looked at Evelyn, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you've won? Aris hissed as the guards took him by the arms. You're a waitress, Evelyn. You'll always be a waitress. Evelyn didn't flinch. She watched as they dragged him toward the door. Just before he reached the threshold, she spoke. Actually, Aris, she said calmly, I'm the person who corrected your math. And in this room, that's the only thing that matters. The doors closed behind him. Bradford Halloway stood up slowly, looking like he wanted to vanish into the carpet. Mr. Pendleton, Arthur, please. I was misled. I can help with the transition. I know where all the files are hidden. I can be an asset. Arthur looked at Bradford with a level of disgust usually reserved for something found on the bottom of a shoe. Bradford, you snapped your fingers at a woman of Dr. Moore's caliber because she was holding a tray. You are the embodiment of everything wrong with this industry. Arthur pointed to the door. Leave, and leave the keys to the company car on the table. You'll be taking the bus home. Evelyn watched Bradford scurry out, his dignity trailing behind him like a broken shadow. For the first time in 3 years, the weight on her chest, the weight of silence, of being hidden, of being small, finally lifted. She looked at Arthur, and he offered her a small, respectful nod. The massacre was over. The healing could finally begin. The grand reopening of the Kimball Fine Neurological Center was more than a corporate milestone. It was a cultural shift. The air inside the glass-domed auditorium was electric, hummed with the quiet intensity of world leaders, Nobel laureates, and the relentless flash of cameras. 6 months had passed since the night at L'Obsidian, but for Evelyn Moore, the transition from the frantic clatter of the kitchen to the silent prestige of the laboratory had felt like a slow, deep breath after years of suffocating. Backstage, the lighting was dim, smelling of floor wax and ozone. Evelyn stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the microphone pack clipped to the waistband of her tailored black slacks. She wore a crisp, white silk blouse, a deliberate, high-fashion echo of the waitress uniform she had worn for 3 years. It served as a reminder of where she had been, a badge of honor rather than a mark of shame. Nervous? Arthur Pendleton stepped out of the shadows. He looked younger than he had 6 months ago. The heavy lines of grief that had once defined his face had softened into something resembling peace. "A little," Evelyn admitted, her hand hovering over her collar. "It's a big crowd. Most of them are expecting a standard corporate slide deck. They aren't ready for what I'm about to say." Arthur walked over and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "They aren't here for the crowd, Evelyn. They're here for the hope you created. Margaret. She called me by my name this morning. Not just a lucky guess, not a fleeting moment. She looked at me. She remembered our wedding day, and she asked for a cup of tea." His voice cracked slightly. "It's the first time in 2 years she's been there." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. This was the data that mattered. Not the stock price, not the acquisition fees, but the clarity in a woman's eyes. "The organic peptide takes time to heal the pathways, but it works, Arthur. It doesn't just stop the fire, it rebuilds the house." "You saved her," Arthur said firmly. "You saved all of them." "We saved them," Evelyn corrected, giving his hand a squeeze. The moderator introduced her, and the applause that followed was a physical force. As Evelyn stepped onto the stage, the bright spotlights momentarily blinded her. She took her place at the lectern, looking out at the sea of faces. In the third row, she saw her team of researchers, young, brilliant minds, who now looked at her with a reverence that still felt alien. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady and echoing through the hall. 3 years ago, I was told that science was a business. I was told that data could be massaged, that truth was negotiable, and that my value as a human being was determined solely by my compliance with a corporate bottom line. The room grew silent. This wasn't the opening of a standard medical keynote. "I spent 3 years serving people who couldn't afford a bottle of wine, let alone a life-saving drug," Evelyn continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "I have been snapped at, ignored, and treated as if I were invisible because of the apron I wore. But being invisible gives you a unique perspective. You see the world as it truly is, not as the powerful want it to be." She clicked the remote in her hand. The massive screen behind her came to life, displaying a complex, shimmering molecular model. "This is Neuro-V," she said. "The corrected version. Standard pharmaceutical practice is to patent a discovery like this, to lock it behind a legal fortress for 20 years, to charge $5,000 a dose to recoup research costs that have already been paid for in human suffering." A murmur of unease rippled through the front rows where the venture capitalists sat. "But I know what it feels like to be the person sitting in the dark, waiting for a light that never comes because they can't afford the electricity," Evelyn said. She looked directly into the main camera, knowing the broadcast was reaching millions. "As of this moment, the patent for Neuro-V is open source. The formula is free for any generic manufacturer to produce, provided they adhere to the safety standards established by the Moore-Pendleton Foundation. This cure belongs to humanity, not to a corporation." The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for 5 seconds, then 10. Then a single person in the back stood up and started to clap. Then another. Within moments, the entire auditorium was on its feet. It was a standing ovation that felt like a revolution. Later that night, long after the press conference had ended and the world's news cycle had been set ablaze, Evelyn Moore went back to L'Obsidian. She didn't call ahead. She didn't use her new title. She simply walked in. The restaurant was as pretentious as ever, the jazz as smooth, the crystal as sharp. She walked to the center of the room and sat down at table 9. Gregory, the manager, rushed over. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Dr. Moore, it's an honor. We've been watching the news. I can't believe, I always knew you were special." Evelyn looked at him, remembering the times he had scolded her for a smudge on a spoon. She didn't feel any malice, only a quiet, settled sense of closure. She thought of Bradford Halloway, who she heard was now managing a car rental kiosk at O'Hare, and Aris Thorne, whose legal battles would likely keep him in a courtroom for the rest of his life. "It's all right, Gregory," she said softly. She looked at the empty chair across from her, then back at him. "I'm just here for dinner. Of course. Anything. On the house, of course. Whatever you want." Evelyn smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Just bring the menu, Gregory," she said, "and maybe a glass of that Pinot Noir, the one from the Willamette Valley. I hear the tannin structure is excellent this year." As Gregory scurried away, Evelyn leaned back and looked at her hands. They were clean, no longer smelling of industrial soap, but they were the same hands that had scrawled a $4 billion truth on a paper napkin. She was no longer a ghost. She was the architect of a new world. The next time you snap your fingers at a server or roll your eyes at someone in a uniform, remember Evelyn Moore. Remember that the apron someone wears tells you nothing about the brilliance of the mind beneath it. Bradford Halloway judged a book by its cover, and it cost him everything. Evelyn Moore proved that true power isn't about the suit you wear or the table you sit at. It's about what you know and what you're willing to sacrifice to do what's right. If you enjoyed this story of justice, science, and the ultimate comeback, please hit that like button. It really helps us tell more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. What would you have done if you were in Evelyn's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.